Rams training camp just started, and they've already suffered an injury. And should the Rams bring back this key contributor from last season? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
You are Locked On Rams, your daily Los Angeles Rams podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Ramily, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rams, your daily podcast covering your Los Angeles Rams, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're also available over on YouTube, so if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor and subscribe to the Locked On Rams YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit that like button, and also let us know, what do you think the Rams should do with the news of Derion Kendrick? My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. I've been covering LA sports for over a decade, 24/7 Sports, Dodgers Nation, Bleacher Report, SI, and the Rams for Locked On. And as always, I'm joined by the Rams pre-half and post-game show host for the Rams flagship radio station, ESPN 710 LA. Feels like tomorrow's the official start of his ninth season covering your Los Angeles Rams, because he'll be at Rams camp. Go find him. Go say hi to him. Go get his autograph. Take a picture. He'll do a little cameo for you for free, hopefully. As Mr. Travis Rogers, the people's champ. Follow him on X at Travis Rogers. And on today's episode, we already have a bad injury update from Rams camp. What will the Rams do? Should they bring back a Ram that we loved from last season? We'll get into that. But first, this episode of Locked On Rams brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, Travis. So, yeah, all those warm and fuzzy feelings about being back in camp and Matthew Stafford getting an adjustment on his contract, they're out of the window because you got some bad injury news. And, of course, it's about Derion Kendrick. And Derion Kendrick is a player that, yes, I know he's a little bit polarizing. I know he's a player that can make your hair turn gray, and you can pull hair out of your head sometimes with some of the plays he made last season. But you never want to have any of your players get injured, especially as bad as this. And yesterday it was reported by Schefter that the Rams were fearing a torn ACL. And today, Sean McVay, he confirmed it, and he said that Kendrick will most likely get surgery in the next couple of weeks. McVay said, I'm really proud of the way that he's worked. He's continued to really mature in a lot of different ways. And if there's one thing you know about this guy, he can handle setbacks. He'll have a lot of support from his teammates and coaches, and he'll attack the rehab. So before we kind of get into what this means for the team and what moves they can make, just kind of what's your initial reaction about this news?
Well, like you mentioned, DMAC, it's always bad news when a guy that started 12 games for you the year before gets hurt on, one of the very first days of training camp. That's nothing but bad news. I guess if you're looking for a silver lining here, it's that there is a little bit of depth at the position. But, this is a player that was drafted in the 6th round not that long ago that worked his way into a starting position on this team, was a regular part of what it was they were doing in the secondary. And I just feel bad for him. This could have been a year for him really to take a step forward, to really become a dynamic player. And obviously that's going to have to be put on hold at least for a little while until he's able to get healthy again.
Absolutely. And for this team, it was going to be competing with Russ Yeast at that star position and the star role. But really, I think you look at his career, he's mainly been a boundary corner. And last season, we saw he was matched up with some of the best receivers from the opposing team. I mean, one that comes to mind is the game where McLaurin from the Commanders kind of torched him. And look, there were certain moments where it felt like, okay, if he's in close proximity to receivers, he can go out there and makes plays. But when it came to recovery speed and needing that speed to make up for certain plays, he just did not have that requisite speed and athleticism that you want for a top-end cornerback. But still, he was out to make his name in this league, out to carve out a role for this organization. And now the Rams, they have to look elsewhere. So I think for me, you look internally and you just don't want to panic. We know that's not what this organization is going to do. It's still very early in camp. You want to see what you have with your internal options. I mean, Trey Tomlinson won the Jim Thorpe Award in college. I know a lot of people, I hear people out there, put him in slot. He was an outside corner in college. Okay. You've played very little slot in his career, but still, I think you need to explore that first and foremost, those internal options, just to see if you need to go out and bring in a guy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was a bit of an interesting moment kind of heading into this topic, this position group, even prior to Derion Kendrick being injured. And I just want to make it crystal clear that there's no malice or ill will or anything coming in what I'm about to say or what I'm interpreting here. But I thought it was interesting that before he went down, Sean McVay was talking about the defensive back group. He mentioned 8 players by name. Derion Kendrick was not one of them, and I do, maybe it's an oversight. Maybe it's just one of those things that slipped his mind. Maybe it's one of those things that doesn't mean anything. But having been around Sean McVay and watched this team as closely as I have and heard him talk about his players before, I'm not so sure that wasn't something. I'm not so sure, because if you mention 1 or 2 guys, sure, that means there's a lot of guys left out. Fact of the matter is, the only 2 names that really weren't mentioned in the secondary were Derion Kendrick and Trey Tomlinson. Like, he went down the list and basically mentioned everybody else by name. And let me just ask everybody listening to the podcast, watching the podcast, the everydayers. If your boss were listing everybody at work that did a good job and listed nearly everyone and not you, how would you feel about that? Right? And so this feels really nasty talking about this in light of a player being injured like that. And I certainly am not putting 2 and 2 together. What I'm saying is, I don't know how much of a part of the plan he was to begin with. He did start 12 games last year. He did have the interception. He did give up some big plays. He made some big plays. But I just thought it was really interesting that on the day before, when talking about that particular position group, his name was not mentioned.
Absolutely. I mean, putting it to perspective as far as how big of a loss this is for the Rams, the truth of the matter is he was going to be a depth piece for this team, not an impact player for this team. Look at his PFF grade, a 60.5 overall coverage grade last season. That's not something you really are upset about losing, as far as he's not one of these key cogs. I mean, you do want to have as much depth as you can. Look, let's be honest. I mean, early in camp, there's nothing more of a buzzkill early in camp, first day of practice, than have a torn ACL to one of your players. It's just brutal. I mean, it's just bad for a guy that's dealt with a lot. I mean, if you look at his career, 1 career interception, 92 tackles, 14 pass defenses. I mean, he's not someone that definitely is a massive game changer, but I do think that for Derion Kendrick and for this Rams team, kind of what he was building towards, he was still a third-year player, right? Yeah. I mean, we've seen the light turn on for third-year players. Last year was his second year. So, I mean, in pass rush, I mean, the way, the aggressive style that he plays with, I mean, there was something there. It's not like he was a nothing burger. There was something there. The potential was there, just wasn't realized.
And I think, we've talked about this a lot. We talked about this with John Johnson in particular. We talked a little bit about this with Darius Williams when they brought him back to rejoin the team this year. There's something about guys with institutional knowledge. There's something about guys that understand how the organization operates, how the organization is motivated. It's how it's structured. And having been in the third year, having come up in the organization, they're going to miss that. The good thing about a player like Derion Kendrick that I think is valuable, that it's very hard to quantify, but if he was going to be used as a depth piece, if he was going to be used as somebody to kind of backstop some other players, it's nice to know that they know the lay of the land. It's nice to know that they know the scheme. And I understand that Chris Shula is a new defensive coordinator and it'll be a little different, but I can't imagine it's going to be night and day from what he played underneath the last couple of years. So you do lose a little bit of that institutional knowledge, unfortunately.
For sure. I mean, anyone who started games for you in parts of 2 seasons knows your system, knows your schemes well. And at the end of the day, it's a loss. It's early in camp, so you have time to go out there and find someone to fill that role. Now, as far as who will fill that role, should the Rams go and bring back a player that definitely had an impact for this team last season? That's coming up next on Locked On Rams.
All right. It is what's the phrase? The dog days of summer, right? It is where football camp is open. And of course, baseball, we still got about 2 months to go. And there is nothing better than being out at a Major League Baseball game in the middle of the summer, having a couple of peanuts, a dog, something cold to drink. Who doesn't like going to baseball? What's the first thing you got to do when you go to a game? You got to find a ticket, right? That's where Gametime comes in. Put the Gametime app on your phone, because Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. prices on the Gametime app, actually, they go down the closer you get to the first pitch. So you can be a little strategic with all of this, right? Maybe you're deciding, I don't know if I'm going to go or not. You don't want to buy the ticket ahead of time. The Gametime app is a great way to get last-minute tickets to Major League Baseball. But here's what you got to do, right? You got to put the Gametime app on your phone. Download the Gametime app. Create that account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. LOCKEDONNFL. Terms apply. Create that account, redeem that code. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcast. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, a special shout out to those everyday listeners out there that watched and listened to every single Rams episode for Locked On Rams all off season. Well, guess what? Today is the first Thursday without football since until February. So football season is coming, and it's coming very quickly, and I could not be happier. I know you guys are the same way. So definitely lock into Locked On Rams so you won't miss a thing about your Los Angeles Rams. All right, Travis. So the minute that this was reported, a lot of Rams fans out there were pounding their fists saying, okay, they need to bring back Akhello Witherspoon. And yes, that sound you hear is Les Snead calling Akhello Witherspoon, at least checking in with him, maybe, possibly. But like I said in the first segment, I don't think they should make a panic signing because, one, you don't know who else could become available later in camp. And two, yes, Akhello Witherspoon did a lot of really nice things for this team last season, but there's a reason why he hasn't signed with another team, right? There's a reason why he is a free agent at the moment. So I wouldn't jump the gun on Akhello Witherspoon signing. Could he be the answer eventually? Absolutely. I mean, we saw them bring back John Johnson III just last season. We know they bring guys back that are familiar with their system, that fit in with their culture. So I wouldn't rule it out, but let's just wait and see before we make a panic signing.
Yeah, I think you're on to something here. You know, this is not unlike the Major League Baseball trade deadline, right? You want to wait until as close to it as possible to see what else might come and what might shake loose, what the price might actually be. I think you're on to something here. This is an option to be sure, but I think what you're saying is right. Do you want to go and take a guy who it will work, right? And maybe it's somebody that you know, that you're familiar with, kind of going back to that institutional knowledge thing we talked about previously. Or do you want to sit tight and see what else might shake loose? Because we know how this goes, right? All of a sudden, as you get closer to the end of camp, guys start getting cut. Guys start to have opportunities with other teams. And maybe you have a surplus of guys in one place where another team has a surplus where you have a little bit of a deficit and there's something to work out right there. So I do think that you have to be a little cautious about acting too fast. And, you know, like we mentioned, I think there are some other players in-house that might be able to fill that role. You know, you got to have some depth there. And like I've talked about a million times on Locked On Rams, like the everydayers, I'm sure, know what's about to come out of my mouth again. Special teams. You're going to need special teams guys that you might not think you need. I think this new rule is going to be totally bizarre. I think it could be really fun. I also think it could be a thing that a year from now, D-Mac, you and I are talking about, like, remember that absolutely whack kickoff thing they did for 1 year back in 2024? Yeah. No, I have no idea how this is going to go. Neither does anybody else. But the more things you can do, the more valuable you become. And I think being a versatile guy kind of just adds a little bit of an element to this year that maybe hasn't been there before.
For sure. And I think there were long stretches of last season where you looked at Akhello Witherspoon and you thought, okay, this is another feather in Les Snead's cap as far as a guy that you brought in that just outplayed his contract, a great reclamation project guy that worked out. But it's not like he was truly elite or anything like that. A 61.6 overall coverage grade, according to PFF. I mean, if you look at his production overall for the team, at 52 tackles, 14 passes, defense had 3 picks, 2 fumble recoveries, made 17 starts. So the biggest pro for me when it comes to Witherspoon is the same pro we were talking about with Kendrick, is the familiarity. That really is invaluable when it comes to this level and someone you're just trying to plug right in. But there's other names that could be made available that could have that same reclamation project boost that Witherspoon benefited from last season. You could find this year's version of Akhello Witherspoon in another player. So my whole point is I just don't like to panic and rush to do anything, right? And unless Taco Bell has like a new value menu out or something like that. But like for the most part, I don't like to rush anything. But for me, it's let's see who else is available. I mean, Adoree Jackson, Steven Nelson, Stephon Gilmore is in his mid-30s, but he's hanging around on the open market. So like I said, let's look at the field, see what you have for the first couple of days and weeks in camp, and then you make the move. So I think that's really the strategy.
I think yes, and there, like you mentioned, there are other players available, but I think that when it like the Rams kind of live in two worlds simultaneously. The Rams can be very bold when they want to be, right? Bold to the turn of making the Jalen Ramsey deal, Matthew Stafford deal, making the trade for Von Miller, signing Odell Beckham Jr., like very bold, big swings that they've taken in some spots. They also can be pretty deliberate in just finding a guy that will fill the spot, right? And this feels more like that. Had you lost a high-level guy, then maybe you're taking a little bit of a bigger swing. But because you're talking about a player who is, not an all-pro, let's just put it like that, then I think maybe, you're not going to let perfect be the enemy of good. If you can find a guy that's good enough that can do the job, like you mentioned, had a couple of takeaways, had a couple of fumble recoveries, did more often than not a serviceable job. You're not asking someone to come in and be a number one corner in this situation. You're asking someone to come in and be a depth piece, be a capable NFL player. And Akhello Witherspoon does fit that bill. Is he going to be an all-pro? No. Is he going to be a guy that, is he going to blow a couple of plays? Probably. Is he going to make a couple of plays? Yeah, for sure. And the net totality of it all may be mostly positive. And I wouldn't be surprised if they went with the guy that's a familiar face.
That's a really good point that you bring up, though, is the fact that with Witherspoon, this is someone who is used to starting, right? And we know that the Rams, they addressed that this offseason with Williams and White, right? They know the direction they're headed to with the outside corners, and Witherspoon has to find a situation where he think that he can have a role that he wants to have, that he can put himself in a position to get more reps and compete for a starting position. So I think for me with Witherspoon, it just comes down to what kind of contract is he looking for and what kind of role is he looking for, and how does he view himself at this stage of his career? Because towards the back half of last season, if you really rewatch the games, you'll probably have a different feeling versus that first half of the season when he was at his best. It was almost like a tale of two halves. And you talk to people who cover the teams that he was on, and that's kind of his MO. That's his
MO. You and I talked about this last year. I remember talking with Locked On Steelers. I remember talking with Locked On Niners, and they're like, just wait. And it was a pretty good call. And that may be the arc. Going back to what you were talking about, I can't imagine the demands are high. I would imagine he would rather be playing than not playing. And again, you're not necessarily, what you need today might not be what you need in the middle of October. What you need in the middle of October might not be what you need around Thanksgiving or Christmas. So things change. You need different things at different times. And maybe what's good at the beginning maybe isn't bad at the end. Maybe you don't even get to the end with this particular roster, that it changes at some point. So I don't know if you can look at this for something that, is this going to hold up for me in January? Who knows? You need something that's going to hold up in August, September, and October. I think that's probably what they're looking at.
Could not agree more. And the one thing that you mentioned too, with perfect and good, and the enemy of that is that this opens the door for a young player to get an opportunity. And that really is how it works in the National Football League, is when one door closes, another one opens, and you have to get as many of those guys through that door. And that's how you find your next wave of contributors, of impact players. And this team is not bereft of talent, right? You have young guys that could step up and fill those roles. And we're going to talk about one of those guys coming up next on Locked On Rams.
Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, right? Lots more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they have you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers.
And welcome back to Locked On Rams. Thank you for making Locked On Rams your first listen every single weekday. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Travis. So I'm still excited about Trey Tomlinson. I'm just going to put it out there, okay? And obviously you don't have anyone get injured, but this is a moment where Trey Tomlinson could capitalize and realize that potential. Because I think a little rewind here, the question that the Rams have to have is, what do we have in this guy? Is this one of the best cornerbacks in college football like he was in 2022, that during the preseason had an 83 coverage grade but struggled with penalties? He's someone who was a massive contributor on special teams but only played 45 defensive snaps on the season. I want to know why he didn't play last season. Was it he's not doing enough during training camp, during the regular season practices? Did he not impress coaches with other avenues when guys like Kobe Durant and Derion Kendrick were struggling? So those are the questions I have, and I want to get those answers in training camp.
I think that's one of the most interesting things coming into this particular camp is what happens with Trey Tomlinson and how he gets used and how much he gets used, because you're right. I think it's hard after a full season of football to kind of go back to last year's preseason and some of the things that we were talking about. But one of the things that you and I were both impressed by relatively early on was how Trey Tomlinson played. Sure, there were some mistakes, but there was a nose for the ball. There was a nose for making big plays, and that kind of popped during the exhibition season. Like you just mentioned, Doug, and refresh me, you said 40 some odd plays during the regular season as a defensive player. That's virtually zero in the grand scheme of things, right? That means he's not playing at all. And you're right. Why? Is it he didn't understand the scheme? Is it he wasn't following directions in the way that he was? Was he out of position constantly? Was he not working hard enough? Was he making bad reads? Was he not, what is it? I couldn't tell you exactly. All I know is that he did not earn the trust of Sean McVay and last year's defensive coordinator, Raheem Morris. Now, there's a new guy, and I think that will serve him better. I think, a fresh start is a good thing for a player like Trey Tomlinson. I think he's going to get lots of opportunities. Obviously, with what happened to Derion Kendrick, there are more opportunities available. It's at least in the short term. We'll see what he does with it. But I'm with you. I think he's a very talented guy. I think there's a lot of raw ability there. But, the people that saw him every day, that saw him prepare every day, that practice every day, go through it, he didn't sell them on it. So I really think that he needs to take a step forward this year.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how this could work out, because I think with Tomlinson, if they're hell-bent on keeping him on the outside, well, if they're ever going to change that, it has to be right now, right? Because you look at even last season, it's an extremely small sample, but when he was in there, he allowed 5 catches on 6 targets, 78 yards and a touchdown, a perfect passer rating, 158.3 against. So he didn't impress in the limited number of opportunities that he was in there. The penalties were an issue during the preseason, but I think penalties in preseason kind of, to me, was like, okay, this guy's aggressive. He's a dog. He's a pit bull. I'm not necessarily that upset about it, but I think that this is a perfect scenario where they say, okay, let's just see how we can optimize him. It's probably not on the outside with that size at this level. So I'd rather see them move things around with Tomlinson. I mean, he's got football in his blood. I think his uncle played. His uncle play in the league? Something like that.
Forgot his name, yeah.
Yeah, some Charger. I don't know. Forget it. But Jet, I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, look, I think that this is definitely going to be a key, pivotal training camp for a player that was one of the best at his position at the college level. So we need to see it this year.
I think you'll have a really good idea on what they're planning on for him by how much he plays in the preseason. We know what Sean McVay does in the preseason. His guys that he has plans for, they don't see the field. If he's out there a lot in the field, I guess there's an opportunity there to go out and really impress and turn some heads. But if he's out there a lot during the preseason in a Sean McVay coach team, not a great sign. That means that they are taking a look at some things that or they want to continue to take some look at things, because if he's got to play, I mean, we saw Puka in the preseason for a hot second, like, nope, he's gone. Kobe Turner, Byron Young, a little bit, but those guys didn't get on the field. Steve Avila, not really so much, a little bit. And then very quickly they decide, okay, we're going to play these guys. Trey Tomlinson needs to impress. He needs to impress quickly, or there may be a different team in his future, I think.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, is that it's a true meritocracy with this organization. If you can play, it doesn't matter what year you're in, you're going to see the field, and Tomlinson could benefit from that. LaDainian.
Oh, yeah.
LaDainian Thompson, 31 TDs, 2006. By the way,
LT, sure.
I want to see a cease and desist from the real LT to that LT, because that's something that irks me for years. And I didn't even grow up in that LT era, but that's an iconic nickname, okay? You're not going to be like, oh, Air LeBron, right? I mean, come on. Don't nickname Jack, man. Like, I was not cool with that.
Yeah, no, there's one LT, and he was breaking legs on Monday Night Football, and not metaphorically.
Joe Thai has been catching strays here on the Locked On Rams podcast. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Rams. My name is Doug McCain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMAC_LA. And you can follow the People's Champ, Mr. Travis Rogers, who will be at Rams training camp tomorrow at LMU. Go hit him up, take pictures, have him sign babies. I mean, whatever. But definitely go meet Mr. Travis Rogers, and see you guys next time. And until next time, whose house? It's Locked On Rams house.